A freight yard at dusk. Two heavy rail cars rolling slowly toward each other on a siding. A worker steps into the gap between them, not away, into it, gloved hands raised, waiting for the moment. To anyone watching, this looks like a man about to be crushed. That instinct is correct. Sometimes it goes exactly that way. But this is not an accident. This is the job, as designed. The device connecting these rail cars is called the link and pin coupler. The name makes it sound like hardware, something passive, mechanical, inert. But it's not. It's a system, and the system requires a human being to stand inside a moving mechanism and execute a precise physical sequence in a window of roughly 1 second. In 1892 alone, 11,000 railroad workers were injured or killed, most of them in this exact space. A safer replacement had existed for 25 years. The railroads knew, yet they chose not to use it. Here is what the procedure actually involves. One rail car carries a metal loop, the link, which must drop into a receiving socket on the approaching rail car. Then, a steel pin must be driven down through the socket by hand, locking the connection before the cars rock apart and the moment is gone. All of that happens while both cars are still moving. Slowly, yes, but the word slow loses its comfort when the objects in motion each weigh 40,000 pounds. A slow rolling rail car does not respond to hesitation. The momentum is already committed before the worker steps in. The design assumes a human intermediary between the cars. It was never intended to be operated from a safe distance because there is no safe distance built into the mechanism. The worker is not working the coupler from outside the sequence. The worker is part of the sequence. And here is the part that should follow from that. The danger is not a malfunction. The coupler is working exactly as designed every time it takes a finger. The injury is not evidence that something went wrong. It is evidence that everything went exactly right. The Brotherhood of Railroad Brakemen kept detailed records, and what those records show is not a list of accidents. It is a statistical ledger of predictable outcomes. Fingers, hands, arms. In railroad communities across the country, the one-handed brakeman was a recognizable figure, not a symbol of catastrophe, just a man who had been at it long enough. Labor reformers and federal inspectors, people already conditioned to the routine violence of industrial work, expressed genuine alarm at coupling injury rates. Even by the brutal standards of the 1890s industry, the numbers stood out. The injury was not a worst-case scenario. It was an expected outcome, anticipated by union actuaries and railroad accountants alike, absorbed into the cost structure of running a railroad. By 1890, American railroads were the largest employer in the country. The network was continental. Hundreds of thousands of men worked on and around moving trains. The coupling accident was not a problem at one company or on one line. It was distributed across every freight yard, every siding, every classification point on the network. The scale made it nearly invisible to any one observer while making it enormous in aggregate. That is how 11,000 became a number in a single year without becoming a national emergency. And here is the behavioral twist that makes the statistics worse. The most experienced workers, fastest hands, best timing, most hours in that gap were not the safest. They were the most exposed. Surviving marginal conditions builds confidence. Confidence builds re-entry into marginal conditions. Wet rails, poor light, cars coming in faster than they should. The workers getting hurt most often were not the recruits who hesitated. They were the ones who had learned not to. In 1868, 25 years before any of this was forced to change, a man named Eli Janney filed a patent for a coupler that placed no human being between the cars at all. Two curved jaws, one on each car, that open automatically as the cars approach and lock together on contact. No pin, no link, no one in the gap. The worker guides the approach from the side, outside the mechanical sequence entirely, and the mechanism closes itself. Janney reportedly carved the first prototype out of wood at his desk. The geometry came from interlacing fingers, two hands finding each other in the dark and locking without assistance. That simple, The device was not experimental or theoretical. It was built, tested, demonstrated, and proven before the injury toll of the 1800s-80s reached its worst decade. The solution was sitting in a patent file while workers were still losing arms to the problem it solved. So why didn't the railroads switch? Not ignorance. Railroads tested automatic couplers and saw them work. The barrier was compatibility. A car fitted with a Janney coupler cannot mechanically connect to a car still carrying a link and pin. And in the 1880s, America, cars crossed multiple railroad networks constantly in a single journey. Coal moved from mining companies to shipping ports across half a dozen competing lines. Grain from the plains passed through several railroads before reaching a Chicago elevator. Car interchange between competing companies was the operational foundation of the entire national freight system. A railroad that adopted the automatic coupler unilaterally could no longer send its cars onto unconverted lines or accept unconverted cars onto its own. Switching first meant immediate isolation from a network that had not moved yet. The individual incentive to wait was stronger than the collective incentive to act. That logic applied equally to every railroad in the country, all at once, indefinitely. Not a failure of will or ethics. A structural trap. The market had no mechanism to move everyone simultaneously, and simultaneous movement was the only move that worked. No single company could break the deadlock. The problem was the system, not the companies inside it. Congress imposed the mechanism. The Railroad Safety Appliance Act of 1893 mandated the Janney coupler across every railroad in the country at once, and in the same legislation mandated air brakes and standardized grab irons, correctly recognizing that coupling, stopping, and platform access were not three separate failures, but one interconnected system of danger that required collective resolution. Railroads were given 5 years to comply. Some lobbied for extensions. Some argued the cost was prohibitive. For smaller regional lines, the capital requirement was genuinely steep, and that argument had a degree of legitimacy. But the mandate held. By 1900, the link and pin coupler had disappeared from American railroads entirely. A coordination problem that resisted market resolution for 25 years was resolved by one act, one deadline, in 7. Here is the visible proof that the mandate worked and kept working. Look at the front face of any freight car in North America today. That curved jaw, the offset knuckle, open on one side, built to lock on contact, is the Janney design, completely unchanged. Every freight car built since 1900 carries the same geometry Janney drew in 1868. Not modernized, not substantially revised, not replaced by anything better in 130 years. Not because the industry avoids improvement, but because the design solved the mechanical problem so completely on the first attempt that there has been nothing left to change. Every freight train rolling past a grade crossing, every locomotive connecting to a cut of cars in a yard at 2 in the morning is using a piece of hardware that had to be forced into existence and has outlasted everyone who fought against it. The transition was not clean. During the 5-year window, both coupler types coexisted on the same network. Trains running mixed fleets required adapter fittings, which meant workers still approached connections that weren't fully automatic, still operated in reduced but not eliminated danger. Some lines completed conversion quickly, others worked down to the deadline, and even after full adoption, coupling accidents did not stop entirely. Workers still guided car approaches. Runaway equipment still killed people in yards. The automatic coupler removed the single most lethal mechanical task from the human body in a railroad operation. It did not make yards safe. It did not remove humans from proximity to moving steel. The law solved one specific, well-defined coordination failure, and that was already a profound achievement, given how long the failure had been running. What the link and pin coupler actually was, beneath the injury records and the congressional hearings and the eventual mandate, was a design that treated human nerve and human timing as structural components. Load-bearing materials in a mechanical system. When those components failed, the worker was blamed. When they held, the design received the credit. The device that recorded 11,000 casualties in a single year was never malfunctioning. It was performing exactly as intended, with the human being as the weakest part of the load path. The Janney coupler solved the connection. Stopping the train was a different problem, and it had almost the same history: invented, demonstrated, ignored, then forced into existence by the same act of 1893. A train that can couple automatically but cannot stop reliably is still a weapon moving through a populated landscape. The story of how standardized air brakes finally arrived involves a famous test run in West Burlington, Iowa in 1887, a congressman standing beside the tracks, and two fully loaded trains that should not have been able to stop in time, stopping. That story is, if anything, stranger than this one.